Okay, let me repeat then. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. We are going to take a quick introduction to some articles I sent out. Number one, I sent out an article about evangelical Christianity. Evangelical is the new word because the old word had a bad brand and a bad taint. The old word was fundamentalists. Fundamentalists got the idea of fundamentalist because there were 5 fundamentals, they argued, of Christianity. It has a parallel in Orthodox Judaism in many ways, and an extraordinarily strict Catholicism in many ways. Not exactly, but in many ways, the idea is there is a strict way of following the religion that must be followed. That kind of sense that this is the way it is. And what started all this was the writing of Darwin, who suggested that the theory of evolution is how we evolved. This obviously went against certain people's understanding of creation as found in Genesis 1 on the 7 days. But interestingly enough, when the 7th day argument was going on, people forgot about the story of Adam and Eve. 2 very different stories, 2 very different characters, 2 very different sets of language, and 2 very different sets of theologies, by the way. Anyway, this group was incensed at the fact that we're related to apes, when in fact we are little less than the angels, according to one of the Psalms. Now, I don't know what human beings that they have looked at that they considered we're little less than the angels, unless the angels have got serious issues. It needs some therapy. I have looked at human behavior, and I have found that, as I've said jokingly, my dachshunds I would trust in a heartbeat. I'm not so sure about most human beings. Those of you who have dogs, okay, and a cat, would find, and we've talked about this a dozen times, that a lot of you would find that your lifelong companions that you can trust, who are going to be there through thick and thin, are going to be your dogs and cats, or both. But this group got very, very angry. The idea that we're related to chimps was just beyond, was the last straw. And they met in Niagara in 1905, and they came up with the 5 fundamentals, from which came the idea of fundamentalism. The first one is the Bible is literally true, period. Number 2, Jesus is divine, the divinity of Christ. Number 3, Mary was an anatomical virgin, and she gave birth without having any natural way of conception. Number 4, we were talking about just a second ago, the substitutionary idea of atonement. The idea is God needed to be appeased. That humankind was incredibly bad and evil, and to appease God, we needed a sacrifice, a substitute to take on the sins of all of us. And if this was sacrificed, God would be pleased and forgive all of us. Now, I'll just stop there. I have to watch out because I have so many issues with this. I don't even know where to begin personally. And then the idea that there was the physical resurrection of Jesus. His whole body physically arose. I just report these out. They became known as the 5 fundamentals. This was an interesting brand of Protestantism. Needless to say, an observation is, and I mean this very kindly too, the bottom line is each of us has to figure out how we are going to process the world around us. The bottom line is each of us has to figure out who we are and how we relate not only to ourselves. I can't see the chat. Here, me said, Dan pulled up a chat and I can't always see this. Is Mark Twain said, man started out a little lower than the angels and has since been getting a little lower ever since. We all have to figure out what it is we are, who it is we are, what it is to live in this world, and how we ground and make sense of all of this. And many of us will find that what works for us doesn't work for somebody else. And that's just a basic observation. Another observation is there'll be groups of people who gather together who think they have the answer to who we are, what the world is, and how we should relate to the world. And inevitably, certain groups will insist that their way of understanding it all is the only right way. And they will try by hook or crook to save the rest of us from ourselves and make us agree with their point of view. Now, this kind of issue has been around since Homo sapiens have gathered, where one group will insist that it's got the right interpretation, the right understanding of everything else, the rest of us are all wrong. This is nothing new in terms of Homo sapien behavior. In religion, you find this particularly true, not only in politics and religion. And as far as we're concerned, the five fundamentals then began to argue that this is the only correct way of Christianity. Judaism was written off of any type. Islam was written off. Roman Catholicism was written off. And any other Protestant that disagreed with them was written off. The high watermark of Christianity in the 20th century was the Scopes trial, where Clarence Darrow squared off against William Jennings Bryan. Bryan won the case and lost, or won the battle and lost the war within a few years. The whole thing collapsed on its own anger, resentment, and grievance. You hear this all the time, and was very, very quiet. And fundamentalism, the word had a bad taint. The branding got very bad. In the 1980s, Jerry Falwell in Lynchburg, Virginia, tying in with Ronald Reagan and riding a wave of resentment and grievance against those damn gays, homosexuals, people wanting to get married like that. Unhappy, of course, with races getting married, intermarried, even though that was law, still that didn't seem right. There was a sense of resentment and grievance about abortion. How dare women know what's best for their bodies? Men know this, the Bible says that. And you can just see the anger and resentment and grievance about life and the world and how the United States is. We've got too many, the country's too loose. We've got too many opinions. This is not right. A lot of these opinions are wrong and we need to be saved from ourselves. And so then you get a rebranding of fundamentalism, and it's called evangelical. And so the word evangelical is a rebranding of fundamentalism, although evangelicals will fall into a couple of different camps. There are evangelicals that are strict fundamentalists, and there are other evangelicals who take a much more relaxed, kinder, don't take the Bible literally, take it seriously, but not literally, and are much more open to discussion and much more open to cross discussion and looking at what archaeology and et cetera has to say. But the bottom line is, except for the inerrancy of scripture, by taking the Bible literally, evangelicals believe that Jesus was divine, there was a virgin birth, that Christ died on the cross for our sins is the old phrase, and Jesus rose physically from the dead. Now, what was incredibly irritating to this group is that other Protestants thought this was absolute nonsense. And that was incredibly infuriating to this group. And you get places like Union Theological Seminary, where I went, Yale Divinity School, Harvard Divinity School, acting as absolute bulwarks against this stuff. And, you know, questions got raised. If God is good, why would God demand a sacrifice? If God is all-knowing, God had to know what would happen when God created. So if there's a mess and God is all-powerful, why didn't God use his power to fix the mess that was a mess? I mean, questions, just basic questions. What kind of God would offer a demand a sacrifice? What kind of God would demand people, create people and get mad at them, get mad at his own or her own creation? And all kinds of questions didn't make sense. So you have then a cultural, most of this was in the South, or in rural areas. And as you all know, in any country, rural areas feel as if they are made fun of, feel as if they are not the same. You know this. I mean, rural areas, there's been this whole thing about rural versus city. You know this in time. Sin is in the cities. Bad things happen in the cities. Temptation happens in the cities. But the rural areas, the water's cleaner, the air is cleaner. And we may not talk fancy or dress fancy, but we're playing good folk. We don't get involved in that stuff that goes on in the city. This religion of fundamentalism, it will take hold and still has its hold and bulwarks in the city and in the South. You're going to find keywords of resentment and grievance are key bulwarks, the energy behind a lot of this religion. I can say honestly that I have tried desperately to find ways in which, how do you talk to people that hold this point of view, and I've given up. I've tried to find bridges, but there's some points you just can't build a bridge. And if you can, and you figure out how to do it, I'm ready to listen, believe me, because I've spent a lifetime doing it. And there are just some people who insist that their way is the only way. Not open to new ideas, new ways of looking at things. And I told my students this week, I said, you know what's kind of creepy? When you realize you've lived longer than 3/4 of a century. That is kind of creepy when you think about it. And one of the things that I've noticed is how much stuff has changed. Yes, a lot of things remain the same, but things have changed, considerably changed. Most of what I learned in high school is wrong or obsolete. Most of what I learned in college is wrong or obsolete. And I keep on mentioning this to you. Black holes, it turns out, aren't black holes. They're planets made of exotic matter. They're dark stars, rather, not planets. They're dark stars made of exotic matter. Ron Eichhorn talked about this last week, the particle called a Higgs Boson, which everybody thought was nonsense until they built that huge collider and they found out it exists. And there's a whole new way of looking at time. A guy named Tim Malden says the way we're looking at time is all wrong. All I'm trying to say to you is, now that we look at things, it turns out our galaxy is a pipsqueak so-so-ran galaxy. It turns out there may be 1 million or 2 million planets just like ours in our own galaxy. Who knows how many galaxies there are in their universe and how many universes are there? Now, none of this would have been on the table when I was in high school. So, to me, remaining open and learning new things is the way to go. That's not the way it works with lots of people. The reality is, I have found out lots of people find that the way they best exist is to have a closed system that they feel anchors them. And that's the way they best adjust to the world. Now, I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying they're different systems. Some of us are just genuinely like sponges, and we just soak up ideas and things like that and find that makes perfectly good sense. Others do not. And that's the way you're going to look at religion. Some religions want it squared. This is what you believe. This is what happens. There's a being. There is an entity. You do this. Forget this life. This life sucks. It's only 60, 70, 80 years at the most. And this is what really counts. When you die, this entity will be very happy if you do what you have to do. And don't worry about this life, because you know it's hard and wretched. You're going to be going to an afterlife. And that satisfies a lot of people. For a lot of us, that doesn't make any sense at all. We have some serious questions if there's just an entity. So I'm saying, welcome to the real world. I sent that article on evangelicalism because there's massive splits. And one thing that I pointed out, I picked out, and I want to share this with you, and I don't know if any of you saw that. There are two things very, very quickly. And I saw this because next week, I'm going to be talking about power. And it's interesting, in all the sermons I've ever had or shares, I've never mentioned power. Now, you would think with how power gets abused, but there's all, anyway, Maureen, everybody's hypocritical. You're right, but everybody's hypocritical too. All right, I want to read this about power. Power, writes David Brooks, is the core problem here. First, the corruptions of personal power. The paradox of decentralization is that it has often led to the concentration of power in the hands of highly charismatic men who can attract enthusiastic followers, and they attract enthusiastic females, and bad things happen. And it goes on to how power can be used and abused, even in evangelical circles, and there's no accountability. I don't know if you realize this. Most of these mega churches do not belong to denominations. They're independent. Yeah. So the only accountability comes from the board. And who appoints usually the board? Either the pastor or friends of the pastor. So I'm just saying it's absolutely fascinating. If I get in trouble, out I go. I'm gone from the UUA, I'm gone for this and gone for that. That's what there's to it. I mean, there's accountability. Okay, just wanted to throw that. The second thing was you're going to find a lot of evangelicals have given up with the institution. They're now talking about real churches are to be found in living rooms with small groups of people that take seriously what they believe without getting involved in power, charismatic individuals, somebody up there prancing around on the pulpit with $1,500 sneakers. Did you see that? They were showing a thing about how preachers, charismatic preachers, and they said, did you see the way some of these people dressed? And they showed people who were wearing $5,000 Rolex watches, $1,500 designer sneakers, and they had all this list of stuff. I thought, whoa, I mean, where have I been? I've missed all of this, you know? So it was, there's a group of evangelicals that saying we've lost it all. The institution is so corrupt, they've given up. And they're now starting again in little house churches, trying to find a core group of, or Spring. Yeah, okay, Zoom. All right, now, next thing I wanted to point out to you, then we'll get going to where we're going to go today. I have never heard of an online group called Wired. Do any of you know this magazine, Wired? Oh, you do? Okay, so you do. Yeah. All right, you're going to love this. I came across this morning by mistake. Now, it has nothing to do with what we're doing, but it cracked me up. For the past 2 weeks, this is February 2nd. For the past 2 weeks, observers of North Korea's strange and tightly restricted corner of the internet began to notice the country seemed to be dealing with some serious connectivity problems. On several days, practically all of its websites intermittently dropped off the line en masse. From the booking site of Air Korea, a page that circles I can't even pronounce this, a page that serves as the official portal to Director Kim Jong-un's government. Some South Korea watchers pointed out that the country just carried out a series of missile tests, implying that foreign hackers did this. Turns out that's not who did it at all. Listen to this. Responsibility for North Korea's ongoing internet outages doesn't lie in U.S. Cyber Command or any other state-sponsored hacker agency. In fact, it was the work of one American in a t-shirt, pajama pants, and slippers, sitting in his living room night after watching alien movies and eating spicy corn snacks. It turns out a year ago, an independent hacker who goes by the handles P4X was himself hacked by North Korean spies. This individual hacker got ticked off and asked the American government to do something. They didn't do squat. So he, on his own, hacked into the North Korean government and stopped everything. So some of the toughs of the spy stuff said, well, he didn't really amount to much. Obviously ticked off that they got all this stuff, this one guy could do it. And he said, don't you think that I'm telling you all the stuff I found? He said, if you show me some respect, I'll give you some more stuff that I found. So one guy gets hacked, gets ticked off and shuts down major sections of, I thought that was so funny. Sorry about that. All right, moving right along. Where are we going today? Good morning, Roy. Good morning. And good morning, Lucy. How are you this morning? Okay. There is a paragraph on page 15, and I want to read this to you, and hopefully I can give you a quick history lesson as to what happened as the verse as versus what editors said happened. Israeli archaeologists, now Nanette knows this because I mentioned it once before and she was shaking her head. Israeli archaeologists who have been excavating the Holy Land since 1967, actually started in 1948, have found no evidence whatsoever to corroborate the stories that you're reading in 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and Deuteronomy, et cetera, the history, or the book of Exodus. There is no sign of foreign invasion or mass destruction, nothing to large-scale changes of populations. Story consensus is the story of the Exodus is not historical, and much of the other stuff is not historical as well. In fact, most scholars agree that what becomes ultimately Israel is the land of Canaan, and those who came in as semi-nomads from the north, the east, and the south. And one group of semi-nomads who came in from the mountains of northwestern Arabia had the god Yah. They come in and they bring their god Yah. There is the god El already in Canaan, and through intermarriage in several hundred years, you then get Yahweh Elohim as a combined mixture. And it makes perfectly good sense if you take a look how cultures come together over time. I look at Miami. Miami is not what it was in the 25 years I've been here, and it's not what it was since 1920. It's incredibly different. So let me backtrack and give you kind of a historian's point of view, and then we'll take a look at how editors tried to rearrange this. The land of Canaan is in fact part of a larger geographical group that involves what we would call today Lebanon. It involves today, think of Lebanon and Israel as one kind of culture. Think of the Phoenicians as being a subset of what we call the Levant. Yes, the Levant. And they will also interact with what we call Syria, because they're all in this neck and tide. If you ever take a look at a map, let's see if we can pull a map up. Let's see the screen share. You can see this over here. Look at all of this. They all interrelate. Now, this is ancient Phoenicia. By the way, it's interesting that Sidon and Tyre are still around. But this whole area in here, goes over here. All of this is ancient Canaan. And it all interrelates. It all interrelates. Here's another area. Let's see if I can show you the land of, this is ancient Canaan. Let's see if I can show you, oh, I needed a map. Come on, Kenneth. Can you all see this here? Can you see this over here? Can you all see this over here? Yes, no?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Look at all of this. Okay, this is let's see if I can get back. This is not what I wanted. I didn't want to see the 12 tribes. I wanted to see, maybe this is better. All right, here you go. Here is Egypt. And by the way, this is where Ramesses was building up in here. This is the land of Canaan. Syria is over here. You see all this? This gives you an idea of the landmass. What we are talking about in terms of what will affect us is about the size of Miami-Dade County. It's not that big, but it interrelates. Like we interrelate to Broward County, and we relate to Monroe County below us. Does everybody follow me? So that while we have our county, you still have all of this here. Okay, now where am I going to go with this? All right. You have the land of Canaan, and it's going to be affected by the sea peoples. Now, nobody knows where these peoples came from, but at the end of the at the Bronze Age, I don't know if you've ever read any history of this, but the Bronze Age collapsed rather suddenly and violently. And I looked it up this morning before class. There are like 15 million theories as to how this happened, why it happened, weather, plagues, whatever. Nobody knows why, but all kinds of peoples became dispossessed. And they roamed in ships, and they attacked Egypt, and they attacked Tyre, they attacked Sidon, and they moved from the Eastern Mediterranean and attacked and landed. And Egypt fought many battles with people trying to move in on its land. Some of it they actually captured as prisoners and sent and settled them in Syria. Some they settled in Canaan. But there was ongoing for 300 or 400 years. The last major battle between these groups of people was with Ramesses III. And after they got absolutely obliterated in a battle, you never hear from them again. Nobody knows where they came from, what they're made of, but they existed for 200 or 300 years as groups of people who marauded and fought and took land and tried to implant themselves in Egypt along what we call the Eastern Mediterranean up through the Levant. In all of this, there will be groups called Philistines. These groups, we're not sure what their background is, except we do know they came from the Mediterranean. They will settle in 5 city-states that are easily defended because they're on the coast, they trade, and they are well armed because they buy mercenaries. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to tell you. Mercenaries are a big deal, a very big deal. And these sea peoples will provide, catch this, mercenaries for Egypt. They'll buy them, they'll be in their army. Others will buy them, and the Philistines are never defeated. I don't know if you ever really read the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, but David never really defeats them. They battle all the time. Saul battled with them, but they're armed by mercenaries. And David's crowd and Solomon's crowd are a bunch of gentlemen farmers with some mercenaries. That David has mercenaries too, but you're going against professionals. By the way, you might want to know the reason Philistines and everybody finally got along is they found out they made more money working together, selling olives and agriculture than killing each other off. When they decided there was a lot of money to be made, the fighting stops. Money. Moving along then, the land of Canaan. The tribes in the land of Canaan, there are several tribes, and they all worship the god El. El was the big god. His son was Baal, the storm god, and he had a consort called Asheroth or Astarte. She was the fertility goddess. Now, when you read the Hebrew Bible / Old Testament, you're going to read the word Baal all over the place. People are going to either worship Baal or they're going to name their kids after Baal. And if Nanette or where's Danny can explain this to me, I never understood why so many Hasidic Jews have the last name Baal. Toph Baal, I have never understood because this is the storm god of Canaan. I never understood that. Never got that. So you get there, and so the number one god at the time was El. And he had a consort, Astarte, a fertility goddess, and his son Baal. As time has it, oh yeah, the Philistines also had superior technology at the time. They had chariots, and they also had the mercenaries to do all of that. Let's remind ourselves the guys are on the coast. The Philistines are on the coast. Inland, in the center of this area is Canaan, and these are small hills and valleys that are very fertile, good for agriculture and animal husbandry. To the east of Canaan is desert. And it's important to remember that. People keep on saying, why is stuff up and down? Well, it was all desert. So you have to go up. Think of where Baghdad is today. You go up from Baghdad, you go where southern Turkey or Syria is, then you go down the Levant and you go down. The rest of it's sand. So you go up, follow where it's nice, it's easy to travel, there is green pastures, and down. Most of the travel on the eastern side of Canaan was semi-nomads. These are people, and by the way, I plotted this out that you can do this very easily. You can go where modern Iraq is, go where Baghdad is, and ancient, Babylon. Take a look at that, and you'll see the routes that semi-nomads used yearly. And they went up, and they went over, and then they went down and stayed, and they went back up and over and down. Okay, in the south, the same thing happened. People in the south moved across the top of the Sinai Peninsula and then moved up through the south and summered, if you will, and stayed in what we now the southern part of Canaan. So you're having semi-nomads come and go from the north, semi-nomads from the south, and over a period of time, the semi-nomads will stay longer and leave less. Until over several hundred years, they just decide to decamp and stay. So you read that with Abraham, he decides to stay. And you're going to read that with others who decide to stay. And when they decide to stay, okay, have a safe, thank you for joining us, Doug. It'll all be recorded. You can pick up what you missed if you want. Our best to Christopher. So these guys decide to stay. And when you decide to stay, you're going to intermarry. It's just a matter of time. So this all makes sense. You have several tribes living in what we call the land of Canaan. You've got people moving in and occupying parts along the Mediterranean coast. You've got this kind of rural, semi-rural center of Canaan that's hills and valleys and hills and valleys. And to the east is desert, and people moving in and beginning to stay, and they intermarry. You get these, you'll get all kinds of long names in the Hebrew Bible of small tribes, and they intermarry, they argue with each other. And then you get the story of the Exodus. Don't believe it. Most scholars will well, I'll tell you why. Let me just give you one of the problems with the Exodus. It says in the Exodus that 600,000 men left. By the way, I think at Numbers it says 660,000. 600,000 men left in the Exodus. Scholars say that's just men because the Hebrew word means males. If you add women and children to that, they said the number is about 1 million. Now, there's some major problems with this. Number one, the total population of Egypt during the time of the great building of Ramesses II was about 3 million. If you had 1 million people leave, what would that have done to the economy and the geography and the environment of Egypt? Number one. Number two, what other geography or environmental area is going to be able to handle 1 million people just like that? Think about that. There's nothing there. If you look at Canaan, 1200 BC, there's no place anywhere that handle a migration of 1 million people. We know that this didn't happen also because there was no footprint. A footprint means that when people of that number move from spot A to spot B, they leave things behind all the time. So imagine, I do this with my class. We're now living in Miami. We need to have, in Miami-Dade County, a population of just about 2.7 million people. If 1 million of us have to leave now, women, children, grandparents, and by the way, it also says flocks and herds. So that means we're all going to leave, and we have to go to Orlando. All right. The jocks are gone, so forget them. So here we go. How far are we going to get in a day? We have to leave Miami-Dade County. How far, dudes, are we going to get in one day? 1 million of us. There are going to be people who've got the dogs. So the dog ran away. I have to go get the dog. The cat ran away. Well, forget the cat. Sorry. Maybe the cat will come back. Well is not feeling well. I have to go to the bathroom. I'm hungry. You finally get going. How far are you going to go in a day? 10 miles? 10 miles. I think you're being fair. You got 1 million of us. All right. Now, the next day you leave, what do you leave behind? And this is what we call an archaeological footprint. What do you leave behind? Anybody, what do you leave behind? You got a million people, what do you leave behind? Garbage, dumps, coins, skeletal remains? Yes, exactly. And poop. Absolutely, poop. You leave poop, trash, all kinds of stuff, and somebody's going to die. Somebody's, yeah, Danny, you're way ahead of me. You're way ahead of me. I'm getting there. So, so they've looked, there is no archaeological footprint because it would be a huge footprint. Just think about that. It's going to be a huge footprint. Now, number two, are most people going to leave the known for the unknown? No. Hey, dudes, we're moving. Where are we moving to? Oh, there's this place. A couple 100 miles away. Milk and honey. Yeah, really? Who told you that? Have you been there? No, but I know. How do you know? I mean, you can see the arguments. I'm not. Who leaves for the unknown? The answer is very, very few. So the scholars argue, and this happens because we've seen this in history before, there are charismatic individuals. We've always had charismatic individuals, and you can see in times of great building and great slavery that things are going to happen. Now, we do know, by the way, that the plagues of Egypt, the 10 plagues of Egypt, all happen regularly. They still do. They're all regular occurrences. Bacteria infections, locusts, lice, all that stuff happens regularly. You get uproars, you get things happen, guards leave because there's so many people, they're not going to have enough guards for all of this. And so somebody says, hey, we've got a chance, let's go. Scholars argue that you probably had, and Danny got it right, you probably had several, over a period of time, small groups, 50 or 60, this makes sense, who will then go to the northern mountains of Arabia. That's the next spot over. Or to the parts of the Sinai. Arabia, I've got that wrong. No, not Arabia. That's another group. You go to the Sinai and you decamp and you make your way slowly across, and you have to be careful of Philistine armed guards scouting the area so they don't make you slaves. And then you may have to take detours. So let me point what I'm talking about. Here you are here. Here's Ramesses. Here's the Mediterranean. So you go off here, but you have to be careful of the Philistines out on patrol. So you go over through here, and you may have to go down into Arabia to escape the Philistines along the coast, and then you come up through here into the land of Canaan. You follow what I'm saying? This is the Mediterranean here. You hot-footed out of here. All right, you're not getting this. This is the Mediterranean. This is the Mediterranean here. Here are the Philistines. This is the Philistine, the last of the Philistine states along the Mediterranean. So you leave here. You're going across the top of the Sinai, but you have to watch out now because the bottom city of the Philistines. So you're going to take a detour down into the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. They're mountains. It's safe. They're not going to come after you.
We can't see your computer.
Okay, good point. Okay. Let's do this. I'm sorry, I did. Okay, all right, that makes sense. Let me, okay. This is the land of the Philistines, right here. 5 big city states employed mercenaries. Here is Ramesses II of the Great Building. You go through the Sea of Reeds, you can get up through here, but once the patrols start, you don't want to get nabbed by the patrols because you've gone from the frying pan into the fire. There's good reason to believe that they made detours and came down in here, and then we'll come into the land of the Canaan from the east. The Bible mentions that a lot. They came in from the east, which is to say the reason they came in from the east is they did not want to get caught by patrols from the Philistines. So you go along here, then you go down through here when you can, down through here, and then you go up back through the east. People here will move in from the south into the land of Canaan. People will come down here from, let's see if I can show, yeah, here. This will make it better, I hope. All right, here we go. Here is Iraq. This is where you get Abraham and his crowd of semi-nomads going up through here and down through here. Everybody follows that. Okay, that's one group. Another group will come up through here and come in through here. Then you're going to get people who escape. They'll go down, but they'll try to come in through the back down here so they won't get nabbed by the Philistines. This is the group you've got to watch here. 5 city-states. They will be on patrol. They will grab anybody they can as slaves if they catch them out on their own. So you escape, small groups. You avoid capture. You get in through here. You get a group that comes in here, and you get another group that comes in here. At least 3 different groups regularly coming into the land of Canaan. Is everybody following that? This takes place over 200 and 300 years. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not dramatic. Groups settle. Mary Grimmy settles in, and she gets word back to her friends in Babylon and the environs. Hey, this is working out nicely. You might want to come. A few will, most won't. You know the way are. So what you're going to get then is 3 different groups coming in over periods of time and beginning to settle and intermarry and intermingle with the already people living in the land of Canaan. The name Israel will appear, and originally it meant let El rule. That's originally what Israel meant. Israel. That's what originally it meant. Over a period of time, the intermarriage will produce 12 districts or so. They call them tribe, but they're really districts where people have settled in. The tribe of Dan is very different. We'll get to that in a little while. So these groups will intermingle, they'll settle, and they'll be pretty independent. Pat is up there, she'll be independent. Holly, you'll all be independent. Just imagine you guys are all independent. You don't really cooperate much. You kind of do your own thing. Until the Philistines decide, since you guys are kind of messed up, they can grab some more land. Now, here's the way it works. I did this within class all the time. Holly and Nanette and John and Pat see down here that Karen and Maureen are getting attacked, but it's not your business. We're sorry, it's not your business. So do you help Karen and Maureen? No. No, not at all. Until, unfortunately, the biggest city at the top of the 5 cities decides to go after your land. Oh, whoa. Now you scream for bloody help, 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 help. Whereupon Maureen and Karen can tell you what you can do for your ass for help. So you've lost land. Maureen and Karen have lost land. Samantha's been abducted. Forget her. She's out of the picture. Bobby Vance is over in the back here thinking he's safe. Ha!
I'm still here.
You were abducted. I'm sorry. You're gone. The Philistines got you. Finally, Holly says to Karen, who says to Grimmy, this ain't working. Pat says, we don't want a king. You know what happens with kings? It becomes a mess. Melissa says, can you come up with something better? We're losing land. We're losing people. We're getting beaten up. They're grabbing our women. They're forcing our men into their army. I mean, what is this? We can't go along it. It isn't working. This actually happened. And after much squabbling and arguing and losing a lot of land and losing some battles and getting bloodied, it's amazing how that gets you to cooperate fairly quickly. At this point, you have your first king, and his name is Saul. Saul is an absolutely tragic figure because he's a cool guy. He really is. But here's the way it happens with Saul. Roy is going to be Saul. Nice guy. He's evidently tall, respected, knows the land, knows people. So good old Holly and Pat and Net are back at it again. And Barbara is watching all of this. And Roy says, the Philistines are on the march. We promised we'd help each other. I need each of you to give me some men and some supplies. All of you say yes. Who shows up? Karen, Maureen, Grimmy sends some horses. Samantha sends some grain, and that's about it. Saul's whole thing is trying to get you guys to do what you say you're going to do, and you never seem to follow through. On top of that, to make matters worse, he has this duplicitous guy named David, who also works for the Philistines, by the way. Yes, that's one of those passages nobody wants you to read. He actually works for the Philistines as a mercenary. Yes, he does. He also is one of those people who's annoying. I don't know if you've ever met people like this. I remember when I was in college, this used to drive me nuts. Somebody would come into a room and the room would stop. This person would come into the room as if pixie dust emanated from them. The whole place stopped. And I would go like, what is this person is such a jerk? And the whole room, I mean, the guy, the ooze charisma. Or you see a girl come in, here we go. And I'm thinking, what? And you see people, David was like that. He just had natural charisma. Saul did not. He was good and solid, but just was not the kind of person to gush, come up, schmooze, give big hugs, love everybody. Yeah, Danny says he's ambivalent about Saul. Saul's a good guy, but he doesn't have the ability to schmooze. Instead of going to say to Holly and AJ, hey, let's go out and have some dinner. Let's talk about this. He writes him a note. What the hell is wrong with you two? You promised. That's not the way it's going to work. David, meanwhile, will come up, give you kisses and hugs and play music for you and charm you to death. So Saul has the problem of the Philistines pressing, trying to keep you guys who say you want to become a group, and the group is like herding cats, and he's got David. And he dies tragically. In the midst of all this, by the way, comes the great embarrassment. I love it to no end. His son, Jonathan. Jonathan is married, and David has many wives. But there is said, and David loved Jonathan more than the love you'd have for a woman. That's a direct quote. And David loved Jonathan more than the love of you would have for a woman. Now that to me tells me that obviously he was not heterosexual. He wasn't homosexual. He was the vast in between. This becomes very, very upsetting to many people. And we know this because Jonathan, along with his brothers, went with Saul, his father, to fight the Philistines, and they got creamed. And there's the story of Jonathan. Jonathan dies with his father. They die, and it's sad. At this point, they decided to elect David as their king. And after having a lot of bad experiences, David does do something smart right from the very beginning. He gets into the Jebusite, a tribe, capital of Jerusalem, which is not this enormous city that you may all be thinking of. At the beginning, it's maybe on 5 acres on the side of a hill and maybe have 5,000 people. That's not what you're thinking of high school, of Sunday school times. It's a 5,000 maybe people, maybe with one fortified wall, but it's not the great huge thing you were thinking of. And he gets in and he decides to ask the Jebusites to sign up and be part of all of this. So the city loves him because he didn't start killing people. So he's got a city that loves him. He has, by the way, they mentioned this in the Old Testament. He actually has a sets of mercenaries. You're going to see some strange names that don't make sense, and those will be identified as mercenaries because we know that from other writings. And he'll put these 12 tribes together, and guess what? He goes and schmoozes the Philistines, and they do fine. There's money to be made with olives, folks. Olives. Yes, olives, olive oil, olive orchards, a lot of money. And so David goes and he has his adventures, of course, the famous one with Bathsheba. But the point is, they finally have a time of peace. The tribes get settled. They begin to play well with each other. Nobody's really sure about Dan. The Philistines, everybody's getting along. Peace brings money. Works. David dies. A lot of intrigue at his death. The bottom line is Bathsheba's second son, the first one died. His second son with David His name's Solomon, and he finally takes over. He does very well by getting good friends with Hiram of Tyre, a Phoenician, and they build boats. They build all these trading routes. I mean, these two are great. There's like two people that get it. One's there, they get it, and off they go. This is one of the most successful small trading groups that ever, I mean, they really were good. They go all the way down to the end of the Arabian Peninsula, bring boats, they trade with Africa. At the end of the Arabian, they go across over to India. They bring the stuff up to the Mediterranean where Tyre is. They trade out the Mediterranean. These guys are brilliant. Solomon dies, and this is where it all falls apart. And the story is really kind of funny. Well, it's not, but it is. He has as his oldest son, to use a very, very Southern phrase, a snot-nosed brat. And his brat of a son who grew up in the palace with a silver spoon, literally, is told, wait a minute, you're not the king yet. You have to meet with all of the tribal chairmen to be elected. And he gets very mad. He says, what do you mean? This is the old contract is each king has to be elected by the tribal chiefs. Well, the kid is having a fit about this, and he's not helped by a bunch of other spoiled brats. It's all in the Bible, actually, by the way. Another bunch of spoiled brats who said, this is stupid. You are the king. You need to tell them where they really stand. So this idiot goes to the tribal chiefs, and he tells them that they got away with stuff under his father, that he is in charge, and then he makes some sexual innuendos about their masculinity and their endowments as opposed to himself. It's theirs. I should read this stuff. You're reading this stuff in my class. Does that really mean what I think it means? He said, yes. And he insults them. So you can imagine the response to this. 10 tribal chiefs get up, and they tell him what he can do with himself and end it right then and there. They have 80% of the land, 80% of the money, most of the people, and they will become known as Israel. In the bottom two tribes, Benjamin and Judah, will have Jerusalem, and that's it, and a small amount of land. So this guy sends the head of his army to arrest them, and they stoned the guy to death and said, try that again, we'll march on you and finish you off. So now you have the big kingdom of Israel. It's not that big, but compared to Judah, and Judah's this small, two tribes, small area around Jerusalem, and they've got the Philistines on the coast. It's not that big. And they share a valley, a big valley with the Philistines, and they decide they're going to be peaceful because there's a lot of olives in the Shephah Valley. So that's what we got. In 722, the Assyrians march and decide to take over what they can, and they want to go into Egypt and bloody up Egypt too. So they wipe out the Philistines, wipe out everything they can, and wipe out the kingdom of Israel. They go to march on Judah, and basically Judah says, take what you want. We'll do anything you want. We're yours. The Assyrians said, fine, give us your money, give us your this, give us your that, and you can remain a small vassal. So they gave them everything they could. They did exactly what they wanted. And there was a king named Manasseh, and he set up all the Assyrian gods, took out all the stuff from the temple, and put everything he could in the temple. Thank you very much. Syrians come to visit. There are Syrians gods in the Jewish temple. By the way, the Jewish temple, you didn't know this, was built by Hiram the architect. And he didn't know what a Jewish temple should look like, so he built a pagan temple. If you looked at what the Jewish temple looked like, its architecture was pagan. Why? Because Hiram was a pagan. He's from Tyre. He's Hiram of Tyre's, same name, best friend. He says, what am I supposed to do? He says, for my buddy Solomon, such a deal. I'm loaning you to go down to him to beg it, build a temple. What do I build? I don't know what Jews have for a temple. He says, build a temple. So they build a temple. It looks like every other pagan temple, except they're Jewish. There's the famous scrolls at the end, the Holy of Holies, but that looks like a temple. The Assyrians wipe out everything. So in the temple now, John Sloan is now called Manasseh, and he has a long, healthy, happy reign because he does everything the Assyrians want. No bloodshed. He puts Assyrian stuff everywhere, smiles, we love you, and exists. Later on, I might add, what the editors do with this, because they're embarrassed, is a riot. But I'm just giving you the history. Then, to bring you up to date about where the editors are, to bring you up to date, and this is where we start next class. This is what happens. Assyria gets defeated. You know the way it goes. Things go in cycles. The new group is called Babylon. And they go marching the same way across the top, and they wipe out everything that Assyria had. Now, at this point, this is a riot, really. It's not funny, but it is. I think it is a riot. The Egyptians said to all these small little city-states, look, if we band together, we can defeat the Babylonians. This is 596 BC. So the Babylonian army arrives, and where are the Egyptians? They are nowhere. Not good. Jerusalem is now occupied by the Babylonians. They deport. This is where we come about the famous Babylonian Exile. They deport thousands of the influencers, the toffs, the whatever phrase you want to use today, the big deals, the decision makers, the politicians, the priests, all of this, they deport them to Babylon. And they set up their own governor to be sure this group is not going to happen again. Literally, this is terrible. 10 years later, the Egyptians come again and say, hey, the Babylonians over there are in a civil war. Now is the time to rebel. Now, as they're getting this little group in Jerusalem and some other groups to rebel, unbeknownst to them, the Babylonians have put down their rebellion and are in no mood to mess around. When they hear that once again, their man got assassinated and this crowd in Jerusalem is doing their thing, really? And they arrived, and guess where the Egyptians are? Nowhere to be found. They're gone again. It's sad, but it's funny and sad. Like, how could you possibly assassinate their governor? Like, what were you thinking? You couldn't trust the Egyptians. You did it again. This time, the Egyptians were really ticked off. They destroyed the temple, destroyed Jerusalem, killed thousands, and deported what was left. And there we have it. Jerusalem is leveled, the temple is leveled, and now we're talking about two sets of people. We're talking about the undeported of the Assyrians, I forgot to mention, in 722 deported lots of people from the kingdom of Israel, but some stayed. The Babylonians deported people from Judah, but some stayed. So we've got to remember, there are groups that stayed. Then we go to Babylon, and we've got all the toffs and influencers who will be loaded with resentment and grievance and trying to figure out what are we going to do in this strange land. And that sets the stage for how the Old Testament / Hebrew Bible really gets to be written. Does that make sense to everybody? That's not the history you're going to read. What you're going to read is editors trying to make things good, look good, trying to whitewash mistakes. And what they don't know, they kind of, they rely upon gossip, hearsay, and inspiration. And by the way, Christianity has the same problem. Jesus dies. Nobody has a tablet. Nobody has a phone to record all this stuff. I remind everybody the first gospels aren't written until a generation after Jesus dies. People don't get timelines. And the thing that Christianity deals with is the same thing that Judaism deals with. There's very little actual stuff. Then you get, well, this is close to what happened. Then the famous, well, I know it would have happened. Or I know Jesus would have said. Or I know they would have done. And that's a lot of biblical writing all over the place. I know they would have done. Well, how do you know? Because I studied. You studied. Yes. So from your studies, you know they would have done. Were you actually there to one of the things, by the way, and I'll stop with this. One of the things that people don't seem to get is when they're making up, going along, writing things down. And I share this with, because you all know it's common sense. But when we studied Job last summer, the latest author of the latest commentator on Job said, the problem in interpreting Job is people forgot tone of voice. Tone of voice is absolutely essential to understanding what people say. Am I not right? It really is. Words mean totally something. Now, remember we said Job ends with, traditionally, Job caves in. And the new commentator, Greenberg, says, no, you don't get it. You're missing the tone of voice. He's being sarcastic. He didn't give in at all. He's being extraordinarily sarcastic. He said, you're taking the words, you're forgetting sarcasm. And you're getting the way people speak. And too often when you're writing from a long period away, so when you're writing history in Babylon, and you're trying to make sense of it, you get words, but you're missing tone of voice. And that is essential. Now, I know this painfully, because when I was in seminary, I remember one time I was in this class and I said something, and the leader of the group said to me, Kenneth, I said, but I said, he said, it's not the words you used, it's the tone of voice you used. And I said, I don't understand. And everybody said, Kenneth, what you said was nice, but the way you said it, you were angry. And I said, oh. And he said, if you've got, remember that, it's the tone of voice you use. It's the tone of voice. Now, do any of you ever really think about, I don't know about you, but I really don't think about that often, but the tone of voice really does change the words that we hear. Am I right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that will be how things get mistranslated, get misunderstood, things get said. And so I hope I've set the stage now. And when the Israeli archaeologists went in, they're going to find there was not a three-pronged attack by Joshua. There was not a unique Jewish, Hebrew, Ibiru entity that took over the land of Canaan. When the Jewish archaeologists go into the new state of Israel, they find it's all Canaanite. You want to know who Israel and Judah are? It's Canaanite. The pottery, the dress, the DNA, it's all Canaanite. There is no group A that got defeated, wiped out, obliterated, and this new group took over. That's editors 500 years later, 800 years later, 900 years later, 1,000 years later, well, it'd be 500 years, the writing in Babylon. Totally misunderstanding. A quick thing, and I'll shut up and I will talk about this next week. A classic example of this was, and I mentioned this before, they have in this reconstructed history, that's a nice way of putting it, reconstructed history, that Joshua led a mighty army and defeated the city of Ai. Ai. The problem was they made Ai a capital A and a small I, as if it's a noun. We now know that at the time, Ai was not a noun, but an adjective, and it meant a heap of ruins. So that means writing hundreds of years later, they had Joshua tapping a heap of ruins because they didn't know. They made a lot of this stuff was reconjectured. There were Jews and others as slaves in Egypt, yes. And one of the keys to this, by the way, this is one of those little sentences that goes by. It says in the Exodus, there was a mixed lot that also went out in the Exodus. A mixed lot. So there was a whole bunch of people. Now, how did they get slaved? I'm watching the time. There were famines. And Egypt according to stories, had some very cool people that thought ahead and stored things for famine time. One of them was a character named Joseph. And by the way, there's an interesting thing in the museums. When Hebrews prayed, they prayed like this. Egypt's, when they have mummies, have them like this. There is this very, very 3,000-year-old, 3,200-year-old mummy that was buried with full honors and all the stuff, and he's buried like this, the only one. And the Egyptian hierarchy in this great, great time, and all the other Egyptians that are buried the same way with all the gold and everything else, they're all buried, but one like this. And the story of Joseph is about how one went down, he gets sold and becomes high up. And he's the one who says we need to put granaries up and store grain for times of famine. People from all over will come in times of famine because they know Egypt has stored grain. And then when they need workers to build, guess who just happens to be there? Holly and AJ and Nanette and Kenneth and John. And guess what? You're not going anywhere, folks. You had our food. Well, guess what? Now it's time to work. And that all makes sense when you think about it. I'm just laying the groundwork. So now we're going to take a look at the editors and what they do with history that they haven't lived. This all goes on hundreds of years before them. Now, just let me ask a question. Think of all the ways we reinvent, or the way we look at when we were kids. Have you ever remembered when you were a teenager?
Yes, yes, sure.
Yes, and sometimes we we do a little reconstruction of some of this stuff we did when we were teenagers, and other times. Yes, I am forever thankful there was no YouTube or video when I was in college. That's all I'm going to say.
If you compare notes with friends about things that happened decades ago, they may remember it very differently from the way you do.
Yes, we do that on my high school group. My high school group gets together with Zoom. It is absolutely fascinating how many different stories there are about the same event. You're absolutely right, Danny. It's like, did we all go to this event? I mean, you'll remember a prom and we'll get two different things, 3, 4, 5 different images of the prom, and they're radically different. Radically different. Okay, I am sorry this has been on so long. I'm just setting the story now. So when we take a look at what Karen's been talking about and start looking at the Torah, we understand history, and then we're going to see people writing about it hundreds of years later. We're going to see two distinct groups writing about it hundreds of years later, and they have a lot of other material they don't know what to do with, and they have to keep it. And it acts as a very annoying counterpoint. And I'll show you some of the counterpoints that people don't want you to see. Okay, let me say goodbye to John, to Nanette. I hope you're warm up there, Nanette, and Pat, where there's icicles. And to Mary Grimmy in Tampa, and to Lucy, and to Melissa. How is Toby?
He's learning how to be a big boy, but he hasn't learned yet. He's still only 4.5 months old.
Oh, he's got a long ways to go. He's got a long ways to go. We're going to say goodbye to Ron, who has great distances between housing units, a low density area. I'm sorry. You're the one.
I put my foot in it. I just fell for it. Sorry.
It was excellent. You said it all.
I got my
Samantha, what's your doggy's name?
Sorry,
This
you're talking to
was
me?
Ripley.
So cute. Hi, Ripley.
Oh, that's Ripley.
Oh,
A
lovely
question
dog.
Little
for
Eva.
Florida folks.
Who
Did
wants to be
anybody
both
see
my
any
Zoom
quality
classes?
differences?
Okay, Ripley, you need to know, gets into everything. Ripley is into everything.
He
there's
looks
Holly-
pretty well behaved to me.
Yeah, but that's unusual.
3 pairs of shoes. 3 pairs of shoes.
Yeah. We've got
Guy.
Bobby Vance. Now you'll notice Bobby, I'm not saying he's ugly. I didn't say that. I did not say that. You'll notice this outstanding person next to him. Big smile, delightful, young, vivacious. That is his wife. When I first met them, I said, "You've been married to Bobby for how long?" And she said something like 35, 40 years. And I said, that's a long penance. And she says, yes, it is. Oh, yes, yes, yes. And we got Maureen. Here's Maureen and Danny and Roy from Bellingham. And we got Ray, Roy, and Ron. And we've got Tony Lee from Miami Lakes. So next time, we're actually going to get into what she is talking about with the Torah and how the writings and the different groups. But I had to set the history for you so you knew objectively how things were and then what happens when people didn't like the way things were and how they're going to try and re-engineer that. All righty. Be safe and well. And next Sunday, I'm going to be doing something I've never done before. We're going to having a share about power. With all the years I've been in the poll, I never really talked about power. We're all aware of the abuses of power, but I also forgot things have power. Music has power. I made a list of all these things that have power, and I started writing this list out, and I thought, where have I been? Don't answer that. All right, we'll see you guys on Saturday, and then some of you I will see on Sunday. So next Saturday.
Ken, what are we
Yes.
supposed to read? Are we supposed to read the next chapter yet or no?
No, we're going to stay right where we are. And then when we get to the next chapter on wisdom, I'm going to have you all send in your tidbits of wisdom and I'll put them together.
Okay.
All right, we'll still stay where we are so I can make, take a look at what she said. And then we get to wisdom. I'll collate what you send in and then we'll show you what your wisdom is and things that guide you or ground you, sayings or whatever have you. And we'll make our own book of Proverbs.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. All right, everybody. We'll see you now. We'll see you.